Here at the Carl Sandburg Home, Flat Rock, North Carolina, 25 minutes from Asheville. National Historic Site, but we have to go back there. One thing that's important, Kate, is Carl Sandburg says he was 67, already world famous when he resettled here, moved here to North Carolina. I believe, yeah, he was from Illinois, from Swedish immigrants, but found his voice in small Midwestern towns, eventually moved to Chicago. Hi. Chicago, Milwaukee, and then decided to move here. So this estate that we're going to be seeing in a moment is 245 acres. This was his last home, and he was a famous poet. Here's a map of the grounds here. We're right here. And you can see that we're going to be walking up and up to the main house right here. But you see the goat barn, other farm areas, and some various trails all around. So very beautiful. In a way, reminds me of, just looking at this, of the Tolstoy estate in Russia. I guess you can see part of the bridge below. Okay, yeah, that's good. And then we've got to go up one of those trails over to the right. Keep going, Kate. Okay, did you get back through there? Look how gorgeous it is. How does this compare to Dad's pond? And we've got a little bit to go. But you can see the beautiful meadow over here, Kate. See the beautiful meadow, and if I'm not mistaken, that's the main home right there, Carl Sandburg's house. But we've got to loop around to get to it. But I believe that's it. Could be wrong. Let's go. But imagine, Kate, you're Carl Sandburg, and we just walked about 110 feet up, a third of a mile is why I'm out of breath. But just keep the camera focused this way. You see the mountains? And you see a fountain here, right? But just behind us, you don't have to spin around, I'm just telling. Behind us is the main home. So as Sandburg would come out, he would have this view. I don't know what mountain peaks you see there. It could be Cold Mountain, but I do want to say that after Kate and I moved to Asheville, Mother and I were talking about Asheville. Maybe I sent her some material, and she saw that Carl Sandburg lived at Flat Rock, and she really was intrigued by that. She knew a lot about him, and perhaps had studied some of his works when she was at Judson College, I'm guessing. But she never was able to come out to the home to see it, but that was on her agenda. She wanted to do that, so we're here for her as well. Carl Sandburg, world famous poet.
This was his favorite place that he ever lived. He lived here from 1945 and he died in this house. We'll go through all that in detail as we move through the house. I just wanted you to get a little bit of an idea about it. Let me give you the two rules of the house, and they are the only two rules. One of them is there's a brown runner that goes all the way through the house. Please don't stay on that runner. Everything else originally always walk on it first. Brought into, if you were a family member, it was here that you spent your evenings. A nice thing about this home, that cost you $2,500.
I'm sorry.
And give it to me again.
You just said it. Okay.
Don't tell anybody you give it to me.
Okay, look at this. Do we have something in common or not?
Okay, I'm going to let you off the fine. Okay. So, what's beautiful about this house and unique to this house is every single object in this house, with the exception of those really tacky plastic flowers that are around, were used by the Sandburg family. Everything is 100% original. There's nothing in here that didn't belong to the Sandburg family. Yes, Chinese checkers, Kleenex, a cigar, and the ashtray all belong to the Sandburg. Let me give you a little quick history of Mr. Carl Sandburg. Mr. Sandburg was born January 6, 1878, Galesburg, Illinois. Second oldest of 7 children, his father was an assistant blacksmith on the railroad. He drops out of school at the age of 13 and a half to help support his family. He's a shoe shine boy, a milkman, a pharmacist assistant, among other things. In 1898, he enlists in the United States Army because we are at war in the Spanish-American War. He's immediately shipped out to Puerto Rico, and as he says in his diaries, the only combat I saw was against those giant Puerto Rican mosquitoes. He'd go get a book and pull it out, open it up to that bookmark and say, you know, Peter, I just was thinking about you, and here's what, and so he'd make you feel at home immediately. That's how gracious he was. Let's come on in this next room. And this is Mr.
Did he use his typewriter? Did you say that?
He did.
Okay.
He probably typed on a little bit, but somebody else probably typed on it.
Oh yeah, he dictated, yeah.
He's got one in his office upstairs that I'll show you that only he used. Well, I'm sure he typed on. This is Mrs. Sandburg's room, and let me give you a little background on her. We said that Mr. Sandburg dropped out of school when he was about 13 and a half or so. She was the opposite. She was graduated from the University of Chicago in 1903, and she was graduated Phi Beta Kappa. Quite unusual for a woman 109 years ago. In 1908, she was attending a Democratic Socialist Party meeting. Actually, it's called Social Democratic Party meeting in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And she meets a young man by the name of Carl Sandburg. He falls in love with her at first sight. She, not so much. So, he falls in love with her immediately, she not so much. He begins to court her and court her and court her, and finally, when things aren't going well for him, he gives her the coup de grace. He writes her a 35, I don't know, your husband never did this. No, you didn't do it either. He writes her a 35-page, single-spaced love letter. She figures if this guy is that dopey, I might as well give him a shot. She marries him in 1908. They are very happily married for 60 years. Let me show you some pictures on this wall right here that we're looking at, and give you an idea of what we're speaking about. This is Hobart, Michigan. So you see that these goats were grazing on sand and scrub. They basically died and went to heaven and found 240 acres of green grass here.
Right.
Now, I said Mrs. Sandburg was a brilliant woman, and indeed she was. She decided if she were going to breed goats, she would breed for certain characteristics. One of the characteristics was strong hind quarters. Strong hind quarters, larger udder, more milk, more money. Remember, Carl Sandburg was not always the famous author that we know him, but he was a young man with 3 daughters. And they worked till 6 p.m. They were dairy farmers. Mr. Sandburg, the exact opposite. He didn't wake up till about noon. He went to work at about 7:30 at night, and he worked till 6 o'clock in the morning. He liked that solitude. He was a night owl. So we know this is a tip. And I found out 2 things today in the morning when I was reading, and I'll share them with you. That thermos is his thermos. He carried that all day, and his drink of choice was coffee, goat milk, and a large tablespoon of honey. Well, it's whatever.
So the goat milk was in the coffee, right?
What's that?
You're saying the goat milk was used as creamer?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And the honey, I guess, was used as a sugar, a sweetener.
So you like his coffee?
Yeah, he did. Now, here's my favorite thing about this room, and it's over in the corner there. I call it a television set. Mr. Sandburg called it the idiot box, or the time bandit. I don't like idiot box. It's my job as I'm a television producer and writer. So anyone calls my deal an idiot box, I don't know. But time bandit I love pretty much. And what I love about that is, if you look at this chair, which is between the table and the windows, it's a leather chair. On the right-hand arm is the original remote control. It's got 4 buttons. One is on and off, and the other 3 are for the 3 channels that we had in those days. I guess it depends where you live.
Yeah.
You know. Also, just about that, you know, it's a sonic. It doesn't have batteries. It runs on sound. In 1952, that he won his 2nd Pulitzer Prize for the re-editing and reformulating of his collected poems. If you're a writer and you look in that room, you immediately become jealous. You couldn't make a better room for a writer. It's just absolutely perfect. And again, his humility. Notice the very expensive desk that his typewriter sits on. That's a 25-cent orange crate.
That's your humor again. Come on.
Let me do this. I'm having fun now. With his shirt on it, he believed that to stay healthy, he should lift that over his head 20 times per day, which he did. It's hard to argue with a guy that lived to 89. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever you got to do. Also, in there you'll see his Victrola, his record player. Before he went to bed at night, he liked to listen to some music, obviously to calm himself, perhaps to make some additional notes on what he was writing. His favorite kinds of music were classical and folk music. And you can see, of course, he's got his books in there as well. This room was called by Mr. Sandburg the most beautiful room in the house for the most beautiful person in the house. This was Paula, his wife's room. Let's go through the architecture really quick, and then let's talk about the essence of the room. Architecturally, it's the only room in the house with the original ceilings. It's the only room in the house that has a bay window. It's the only room in the house where a closet has been changed into a bathroom. The reason we know that is, look how low the doorway is there.
Oh, yeah.
And look how high the doorway is here. So you can see that. Also, these cabinets and these closets were put in by Mrs. Sandburg. Top for storage, obviously, and the bottom for clothing.
Oh, the tile floor.
So, two lovely photographs in this room that I like very much, both taken by Mr. Edward Steichen. One is of his sister, which sits right over there, and one of his brother-in-law, which indeed sits on top of the bookshelf. They're both wonderful portraits. Now let's get down to the real essence of this room and why it's important and why I spend a little time in here. At 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the afternoon, Mr. Sandburg would take a break, and he would come up into this room, and he would sit on that white divan right there. He might read. You can see his eye shade is there. He might listen to his Victrola, and you can see there's a record of Andres Segovia on top. That was his favorite composer, and Mr. Segovia was also a big fan of Carl Sandburg. Actually wrote a piece of music for him, which is in the bookstore downstairs. As he was sitting here shortly after, Mrs. Sandburg would come up, and that was her favorite chair, that green chair. And she'd pull that up alongside him, and they'd sit together, and that was their private time together. That hour, hour and a half, they were not to be disturbed for any reason, and that's how they caught up with each other and stayed in touch with each other. Remember, he was traveling and writing all over the world, and she was running a major dairy farm. They didn't have much time to get together and discuss what couples discuss, whatever it may be. Can we afford the mortgage? Can we buy a new car? Who knows? What happens? Now you saw that he slept upstairs, and the reason for that was obvious. His schedules were absolutely diametrically opposed. But in 1965, he became quite ill. And she said, you know, that's too much for you to do, is go up there. So she had this bed moved into this room, and this became his bedroom as well. On July the 22nd of 1967, he was on his bed with his eyes closed, and she came in to check up on him. And she sat on the corner of the bed, and as she did, the mattress moved. And he opened his eyes, and he saw her. And he said, Paula. And his eyes rolled back in his head, and he died right then and there. So the last word that he uttered was her name. And he died in the arms of his beloved after 60 years of marriage. It's a lovely romantic story. I tell it all the time. What's even nicer about it is, it's true. We know it is because we have the eyewitness to prove it. But what's also lovely about it is when they were courting, they made a promise to each other that they would make the world a better place for all working men and women. And they did. They succeeded. She, through her agriculture and her dairy breeding, he through his literature and poems, and both of them through their social activism. They were very active politically. But what's more important about this room is, this room was the guest room as well. Oh. And it was used by noted guests who came to visit in Connemara. Two people I know who stayed here. First was Senator and often presidential hopeful Adlai Stevenson from Illinois. And the second was Thurgood Marshall, Supreme Court Justice. Both gentlemen stayed in this room. And of course, Mr. Sandburg, being the magnificent host that he was, which he was, said, you know, guys, if you need any light reading, I'll just leave 400 or 500 books in here for you to thumb through while you're here. Okay? The kitchen was in shambles when they moved in, and Mrs. Sandburg redid the entire kitchen. It's got a lot of the brands that I grew up with. It's got Crisco and Diamond Crystal Sugar. In the winter, they put Hershey's Cocoa and Lipton Tea, all the things that I had as a kid anyway. But what's interesting about this room is, look straight ahead, you'll see a conical-shaped cardboard container, which says dairy goat milk. Today, we would call it branding. But when you went to the market here in Hendersonville or Edneyville or Etowah or Flat Rock, this room served two purposes down here. One, it was the summer kitchen. The house gets very hot in the summer, and so most of her canning and preserving, a lot of the cooking during the summer was done down here. Here's her stove, and of course here's a work area, a refrigerator, and a human sink here. The other part of this room was, it was the kid room. Now I said before, and I'll say again, she was a commercial dairy farmer. So when a baby goat was born, it was immediately taken from its mama and brought in here. Brought in here for two reasons. Number one, a goat was worth more if it had acclimated to human behavior. And number two, her goats were kept on test.